And we're back here again. This past week has been interesting. A lot of the boxes that I uncovered last time from this one paranormal society, the newer ones I've been poking through have had a lot more evidence stacked into them, little bits and bobs, and things attached to them. It's been interesting moving them around. It's a good thing I have my other team members here, otherwise I probably wouldn't have even gotten this prepared this week. But I do have at least 2 more accounts to put into the record. So, shall we begin? Master Collection, Ontario Paranormal Institute, tape number 1. Investigator 32, accounting. Case file number 1. Account of Hana Kitagawa regarding a smiling creature she captured during a shift at a fast food restaurant. Account begins. Hey, you can't lock me in here like this. I didn't do anything wrong. I saved my coworkers and I caught that thing. If anything, I deserve a raise. Oh. Yes, I guess you're right. I may need to find another job after this. I'm not sure what the health ministry will make of this, but it's not like this is a normal infestation, right? Right? Okay. So, if I tell you everything, I'll be free to go? I have a cat, I have to feed her and stuff. Oh, okay. Good, thank you. I work for... Well, I guess I shouldn't say right now, huh? You guys know anyhow. So I work for a fast food restaurant chain, and I very bravely captured a... thing. Not sure exactly what it was. I mean, it looked human, but the way it acted? No. Let me start at the beginning here. You'll see what I mean. Okay, so, as I said, I work for a big fast food chain here, and it's the usual sort of corporate-run service industry atmosphere. The customer is always right, and all that. We even have a menu item so customers can order a smile. No joke. It's free, but if we don't do it on request, we get in trouble. Gross, huh? Anyhow, the bosses have been extra on us to smile more this past year, and even the customers have been ordering smiles more. They can barely see them through our masks, but whatever. So, one day the boss comes in, and she's looking tired. But she's still smiling this big, wide smile, and she tells us that she knows things have been tough, but they're going to start giving us bonuses for being extra cheerful on the line, to try to boost spirits or something like that. I'm not some corporate brown-noser, but more money is more money. I restore antique books as a hobby, and anything extra I can get would help me get some great old books. That's something I'm going to do, So we're all extra cheerful. Honestly, it was pretty creepy for the first bit anyhow. I admit I kind of got into it. Really started feeling, not happy, but content maybe? Like I didn't care so much about the bad things. Or anything, really. This went on for a week or so before the accident. The man got hit by a car on his way across the road to the restaurant. Got hit and spun head over heels right through our glass door. Well, half of him did anyway. There was glass and blood everywhere. Some of the customers were running and screaming, but everyone else, including the staff, including me, just stood there, smiling. It just didn't seem to matter. It wasn't until I got home that it hit me just how fucked up the whole thing was. I remember shaking and falling onto the ground, and I just kind of stayed like that all night. When I woke up, it was sometime after 2 a.m., and I felt terrible. My jaw hurt, my lips were cracked and bloody like I had been smiling nonstop for way too long. My apartment was a mess too, half-eaten food all over, unwashed clothes and piles, all of that. I hadn't realized I'd let it get that bad. Huh? Oh, well, honestly, cleaning up took a day or so. but it helped me calm down. My boss didn't seem to care much when I called in sick either. About a week after that, I figured I'd try to make a shift. My boss had even kept paying me, which was super weird. Anyhow, I get there and right away things are weird. There's unmasked people everywhere. The place was absolutely packed. Everyone was eating, chatting, and smiling like nothing was wrong. I checked the big masks required sign and it was still up, so was confused, but I went in the staff door and looked around for my boss. I stopped immediately inside the door. Staring me in the face was another unmasked smiling person. Some younger woman just grinning at me, standing next to Mio. I asked her what the smiling lady was doing here, and she looked at me like I had two heads. I pointed right at the person, and Mio asked if I needed more time off. I shut the hell up and stormed off to the boss's office in the back. More and more of those smiling people were in the back, next to the prep table, at the deep fryer, in the storage room, always next to one of my coworkers. I had no idea what was going on. I thought maybe there was some sort of inspection or something, but no mask was seriously dangerous, so I was going to talk to my boss about it. So I knock on the door, and she tells me to come in. I do, and there's another person there with her unmasked and smiling. I admit I didn't handle it well. At this point, I had seen someone die and had some weird blank in my memory about the state of my apartment, and then all these smiling people. When I asked her who this person was, and she said she had no idea what I was talking about, I lost it. I walked up and poked that smiling jackass on the chest. Now, I don't do that to people, but I'm pretty sure they don't squish. Like, my finger went right into the guy's chest. No resistance. I made a very unflattering noise and jumped back. My finger was covered in this dark goo. It looked kind of like the grease we clean from the fryer every once in a while, you know? Like, dark and a little viscous. I wiped it off on the spare chair as the guy just kept staring at me. My manager looked at the smiling man like she had seen him for the first time. She touched her face and stopped smiling and looked up at me. That was probably the most frightened I had ever seen someone. Whatever that thing was didn't change expression. It just reached out and touched my boss's shoulder. It was like the touch had thrown some switch in her brain and she was back smiling again. She stood up, the smiling man's hand on her shoulder, and started around the desk towards me. I was not waiting around, and I rushed out into the back room, startling my coworkers there. I froze. Every one of them had a smiler with them. And as I stood there, thinking of what I could do, I heard a horrible shriek rise up behind me. My boss was standing, open-mouthed and wailing at me. It was a horrible sound. The smilers seemed to respond to the screech, and they all placed a hand on one of my coworkers, making them into puppets in the same way my boss had been. I had to get out of there, so I kicked my boss's door shut behind me. A little too hard, I think. I heard the doorknob snap and then something banging on the other side of the door. Well, there's no way I could trap the rest of them like that, so I ran into the kitchen, and the grill staff were waiting for me. Smilers all guiding them towards me, all of them with that placid grin on their face. I don't know exactly why I did this, but I was next to the fire alarm, and I didn't really have anything else to do, so I guess I just pulled it. The sirens were very loud, but honestly what saved me was the water. We have an older fire suppression system still, and it uses pipes of water. When I pulled the lever, the caps all burst one after another, and the water came spraying down all over the place. The smilers hated it. They opened their grinning mouths and writhed like they were screaming, still not making any noise that I could hear. It looked like the water was burning them, like acid. After a few minutes, the water slowed to a trickle, and all my coworkers were free. Well, almost all of them. My boss was still stuck in that room, but you guys dealt with that, right? You went in there, you know I didn't kill her. Do I get a lawyer now? End of account. Oh, an extremely enlightening report. This is the first instance I know of that describes not just the physical confrontation, but a complete cleansing of the smile entities. Honestly, they operate more like parasites, but regardless, this is an exciting find. I should also note this entire report was in Japanese, so that's still happening. Okay, let's start at the top. Hana Kitagawa is currently in the employ of the Public Security Intelligence Agency, which is Japanese intelligence service. Obviously, she was unavailable for comment. However, from what I could tell, she does very little actual work with the agency itself. It seems as though she's being kept safe from the public so as not to spread what she knows. Information on the incident described by Miss Kitagawa is currently very sparse. I was able to confirm her account of a man being killed in a traffic collision outside her place of work, which is how I found the location at all, and an incident involving the local armed response unit. I was able to get a very vague report that the unit was called to Miss Kitagawa's location to deal with a quote-unquote threat. It remarks that 2 bodies were removed, but no shots were fired. Following up on that, there was curiously no obituaries, but the entire staff of the location was rotated to other restaurants. Most move on. I contacted a few of them, but they honestly didn't seem to remember much of what happened. The lack of evidence was starting to really frustrate me until I received an anonymous email entitled 1, with a video attachment. It seemed to be the helmet cam feed of one of the response officers. The feed shows a group of officers entering a small office in the back of a fast food prep room. There's a bit of trouble with opening the door. The obstruction is found to be the body of a woman who had collapsed against the other side at some point. Once inside, the officer confronts a figure huddling in the corner of the room under an overturned filing shelf. The figure straightens up in response to the officer entering. The camera shows the melted, grinning face of what may have been a middle-aged man. An unidentifiable liquid appears to be running down and off the figure, which raises its arms and lurches towards the officer, who discharges his weapon several times. The creature sheds large portions of its mass with every strike, but it doesn't stop attempting to make contact with the officer until it's almost obliterated. Obviously, the reports have been doctored, and the witnesses have likely been sworn to secrecy. I'm not certain who sent the tape, but it's satisfying to know the smile parasites can be dispatched with conventional weapons. Water is obviously an odd thing to affect these creatures, but it does make me think about old vampire superstitions about running water. I'm happy to close this case file, especially after seeing that video. The image of a disembodied smile floating in sludge at the end of the tape is going to stick with me for a while. Another tape. Another lovely case file. This one in a big, thick, leather-bound book. I can't see any markings on it, except for a big number 1 on the spine. So it's volume 1 of whatever it is. Is that number again? This case file came with a dearth of information. There's a bunch of verified older material in the box. This is from some time in the turn of the 20th century. And it came with a couple of other big things that aren't nearby right now, thankfully. But you'll see why. Okay. So, Master Collection, Ontario Paranormal Institute, tape number 1. Investigator 32 Accounting. Case file number 1. Account of Elizabeth Torello, regarding her efforts to contact her deceased partner. Account begins. September 8th, 1888. The following pages represent the sum knowledge of myself, Elizabeth Torello, regarding the shadow folk known by spiritualists, and will be added to the mysterious volume 1 of the tome I call the Chronicle, before I hide it forever. It should be known from the outset that every effort was made to save the lives of the workmen and my dear friend Nigel. But I think the reader will find that I was quite out of my depth. For my part, I lament the drive for answers regarding the supernatural. To start at the beginning, my truest and most beloved Ava passed on 2 summers ago, succumbing to the lung ailment so common in our time. She suffered long, and it was terrible. Regardless of the appearance of impropriety, I reject any attempts to frame our love as simply friendship. I mention this to attach the first thread of this story to that most solid of anchors. For you see, my Ava was a lover of books, and left me her collection of antiques. It was here that I first came into contact with Chronicle. It was a handsome leather-bound book, whose pages were old and yellowed with age, but by my guess it was at least 100 years old, with accounts in languages approximating English but foreign to my eye. I took to calling it Chronicle after reading the first line of the first account contained in the tome. It was, it seemed, a collection of accounts of the supernatural. Not given as I was to the fashionable trend of spiritualism, I had originally put the book aside and thought nothing more of it until later, when a good friend suggested to me that I might try a seance to contact Ava to ease my pain. Please, dear reader, do not judge my friend Nigel too harshly. He truly believed he was helping, and so we tried. Predictably, nothing of note happened, and both Nigel and I felt foolish. But it ignited in me the smallest of hopes that perhaps there was something to this trend. And so I dove into research. I tried talismans from foreign lands. I tried various rituals. I even approached a self-proclaimed witch to receive blessings from the old gods. Nothing worked. Finally, last year, at the height of my despair, I found a curious shop run by a man claiming to be items of spiritual significance. I shall not record his name here. No. Wait, I find I cannot help but do so. Oracle bids me, and so his name was Elias Brecken. Damn this book. Mr. Brecken was truly the spur that pushed me to the dreadful mistakes I would later make. His primary trade seemed to be mechanical inventions to aid in the discovery and luring of the supernatural, and to my grief I thought I had found someone who could finally help me. Mr. Brecken believed he was close to a breakthrough in the science of spiritualism, and while he had attracted some investors before, he needed more to finish. He said he knew of a woman in the United States making a marvelous home in California to entrap and confound harmful spirits, while making a safe place to contact the realm beyond. He needed someone willing to donate such a property, and with enough money to fund his tinkering on a device made to pierce the veil. I, coming from a wealthy family, and with no one to dote on any further, agreed to his request. We found an old manor house in the countryside, and begun work immediately. Parts of the old place were torn down and replaced with new structures. The towers, promenades, sunrooms, and redundant water closets, all to confuse wayward ghosts. Stairs leading to brick walls, doors opening to nowhere, hallways that shrunk in proportion until a mere crawl space. Mr. Brecken's designs were unfathomable, but he insisted his friend in the States was doing the same with good results. Finally, nearing December, Mr. Brecken summoned me to his shop in the mansion. There were many strange and marvelous things indeed there, and it was a common thing to hear the colorful language of Mr. Brecken as he attempted his various experiments. Over 2 months ago, I had been reading what I could of Chronicle, and had come across drawings that very much looked like spiritualist practice, and so I had lent the tome to Mr. Brecken, in the hopes it would help. He had gleefully tinkered since, and was close to, he said, a major development. A tall object met my gaze as I entered, and a very worn-looking Mr. Brecken was standing next to it very proudly. He asked how I liked the look of the thing, all brass and cogs, glass and ball bearings. I said it looked quite busy, and he laughed at my quip. He said this machine was the thing to split the veil, and the house was certainly ready, so we only had to finish the machine, and we could make our first real attempt. Overjoyed, I asked what Mr. Brecken required, and he said that as this was to contact Ava, Chronicle dictated the sonic element of this machine be something that connected the two of us, in order to lure her in. It took a moment, but I remembered the fondness Ava had for old clocks, their ticks and bells. Mr. Brecken nodded enthusiastically and got to work. 2 days later, a marvelously complicated grandfather clock stood in the seance parlor. Nigel had been living with us this past few months, helping me to barter with workmen and ensure I wasn't being taken advantage of. I will say, he did not have a great fondness for Mr. Brecken, and he was certainly quite right not to, though for not the reasons he thought, I'm sure. Nigel had recently been quarreling with the carpenters working on one of our new additions, as 2 of their number had disappeared while working on the home. No trace of them was found, but the workmen were adamant that something was amiss, and the house itself had refused, and had refused to work any further. This put Nigel in a foul mood, but he was also excited to make the attempt at a seance with this machine, if only to prove Brecken a fraud. So that night, the stage was set. The seance room was lit with candles, Nigel, Mr. Brecken, and I all seated at the table. Mr. Brecken's clock was to be our guide, as it was rigged to ring in an hour that did not exist, and in so doing, break the veil enough for us to try to contact Ava. The house, we trusted, would keep us safe, and so we waited, and at 12:59 a.m., Mr. Brecken bid us to start the ceremony. Nigel led us, and the clock struck 1, and then 2, and then 3. At 4 in the sequence, Nigel and I looked askance at Mr. Brecken, and he looked gleeful as he was checking his own watch, inviting us to do the same. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. As it kept ringing on and on, Brecken's watch slowed, and the air seemed to grow thick as a London fog. 10, 11, 12, 13. The last bell shook the house like an earthquake. The gas lamps flickered and spluttered, plunging us into darkness. Taking up a candle, I heard Mr. Brecken happily muttering, "I've done it, finally." But I was too preoccupied. We were no longer alone in the room. I saw 2 workmen from the carpenter's men standing and looking fearful. I saw many frightful figures in the shape of men, all shadow and anathema, it seemed, to the light. And I saw her, my Ava. Tearful though she was to see me, she screamed with no voice, diving behind me to wrestle with a shadow man who had been about to touch me. "Go," she mouthed, as her and the workmen kept the creatures away. Mr. Brecken and Nigel both leapt the table, and Nigel grabbed my arm as we rushed for the door. "This is what the house is for," shouted Mr. Brecken. Split up and hide. He sprinted away, and I'm not sorry to say I have never seen him again. Nigel and I, however, kept together, running down false hallways and through secret passageways. A great buzzing as a mighty swarm of bees chased us through the house, and everywhere the shadow men appeared from dark corners to grab us. I lost Nigel on a switchback stair. One of the things touched his arm ever so lightly, and he just ceased to be, gone as though never having been there at all. Rounding the next corner in tears, I saw Nigel and Ava wrestling a mob of shadow men, the carpenters waving me to a side room. I'm sorry to say that I lose details here. The next hour was filled with close calls and blindly running from one area to the next. Sometimes I'd be alone, and others I'd be surrounded. Sometimes my ghostly companions would bravely save me. Others the shadow men seemed not to be able to reach me, as though the original walls of the building held sway over their movements somehow. In any case, exhausted as I was, I ran until the clock struck 1. All at once the shadow men and my companions were simply gone, vanished into thin air. Reader, nothing of these people remained. No one remembered Nigel, knew he existed. The carpenters remembered their friends, but their families did not. I have no explanation except, perhaps, that Chronicle may have lent some power here, as it seems to have been able to hold information, even in regards to dear Nigel, whose birth and hospital records even had vanished. Most of all, dear reader, I write this as a warning. Do not follow the instruction in these pages, and beware of the clock striking 13. End of account. Well, 2 for 1, it seems. Not only do we get greater detail of the nature of they who are not there, we also get a much clearer account of this mysterious one entity. Hey, Chronicle's a much better name. Well, let's start with the shadows. Elizabeth Trillo, born 1855, was the daughter of a minor noble family. She did indeed have access to a great deal of wealth and property at the time, and was indeed involved with a woman named Ava. I'm sure Elizabeth would be upset but unsurprised to know that any mention of the relationship between those two has indeed been emphasized as being a friendship, as many queer relationships were described at that time. I'm amending that now in these records at least. Ava appears to have been a much lower station apparently, as I don't have records of her family name, but I was able to find a death certificate included in this file that was genuine. Cause of death was tuberculosis. As for this clock, and its maker, Elias Brecken himself doesn't show up in any records. Not any that I can find anyway, so it might be that he was taken by the shadows, or that it was a pseudonym, common to shysters and tinkerers of that era. The home as well doesn't show up, but that seems to be a more mundane thing, as I found some obscure references to the Torello estate being demolished on Elizabeth's orders in late fall 1888. The only thing that remained are apparently the evidence of Ava's death, Chronicle, and a large grandfather clock in the back room. I'm going to be staying clear of that one. Speaking of which, it's interesting to hear someone summoning the shadows instead of being stalked by them randomly. It's also interesting that Elizabeth survived, and the way she survived seems to point to a few things. The time 13 a.m. has cropped up in every story so far, and I'm starting to think that maybe the idea that it's an hour that doesn't exist is the clue. Like, these entities only operate in the absence or non-existence of things. Shadows, places that don't exist, an hour that isn't real. Interesting thoughts. Now, for Chronicle, the occurrence of the number 1 is unmistakable in this story, as in all the others. It seems whatever this force is allows those affected to remember those taken by the shadows, and it seems makes them unable to hide information. The kid in the Nowhere House account not being able to burn the non-existent home, Elizabeth not being able to hide the name of Elias Brecken. Not for nothing, but I'm not sure I like the idea of something so covert having power over these things. I need to be careful.
Yes, you do.
What the hell was that? Who's there?
I am the word, Robert. It is time we spoke.